Hey YouTube, this is the user formerly known as Epicurus A Greek, formerly known as Rusty Shackelford, and currently known as Maximus Confesses. Now, if you're going to ask me why I've gone through more name changes than P. Diddy, Sean Puffy Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka Diddy, currently Diddy I believe, well, the reason for that is simple. I really can't commit to anything, and I figure I might as well commit to this one because I have a blog named Maximus Confesses. It was around before Rusty Shackelford, but after Epicurus A Greek, and I want to make the channel and the blog simpatico. So that's the reason why. Now, I'm going to tackle in my first return to YouTube video, first return in a long time video, the folly of the true fool. And no, that previous video with Roy does not count. That was just a short little clip. Today I'm going to be tackling what I tackled in my first blog post entitled The Folly of the True Fool, which is presuppositionalism. Now, presuppositionalism is an apologetical tactic whereby one argues a priori that one's worldview is the only one that works and the others fail instantaneously. And that worldview is the Christian worldview, specifically the Reformed Calvinistic worldview. Now, I disagree with this. I believe I'd fall more underneath the classical school of apologetics, namely under great thinkers like St. Thomas Aquinas. However, I do rather like the presuppositional approach, which is compare and contrast worldviews, as opposed to try to reason with a non-believer from the bottom up. At least when you approach the subject matter in a dialectical manner, it becomes more like a conversation between two people and far more Socratic, which I think is the better method of getting to understand your own position. Now, the subject matter I'm going to tackle today is the claim that non-believers suppress the truth about God and their unrighteousness. I don't believe this for a minute. Now, many presuppositionalists will usually approach this tactic from using a verse in the first chapter of Romans. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 20. And it reads, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of man, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God has made it evident to them." And verse that is taken from the New American Standard Bible. Now, you could find the sources in the blog post in the description below. Now, how does someone respond to this? Someone who would like to tackle the presuppositionalist from the biblical approach or biblical exegetical approach, as opposed to maybe taking out their belief in God. I find that if you actually attack a presuppositionalist in basis in Scripture, they'll have more of a reason to retreat from their initial position. I find this helpful if you're a Christian or an atheist responding to this. So, first of all, they're isolating the meaning of this verse from its full context. In the full context, what's being discussed here is a subset of people in the beginning, because it reads, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse." Let's remember that little bit, which is part of verse 20. Now, if we're going to include this in our overall analysis, let us remember that this is "for since the creation of the world." And here, they didn't know God, they didn't give thanks, as this verse later, as the chapter later details, nor did they honor or give thanks to God, but became futile in their speculation, and foolishness darkened their heart. Professing to be wise, they become fools, and exchanged the glory of the corruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, of birds, and of four-footed animal, and of crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over to their lusts, to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And this is where it gets pretty interesting. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural, and in the same way the men abandon the natural function for the women, and burn their desire towards one another, men with men committing indecent acts, and receiving in their own persons the due penalty for their error. So this goes on from verses 20 to 27. Now, what's fairly interesting as a response is the fact that it is said to a small set of people in the beginning of creation. Now, if the presuppositionalist wishes to deny this, what's tacked on is a couple of things. One, a notion that a person worships idols. So unless the atheist in question or the non-believers or a certain subset of non-believers are actually not doing this, then this is false, which we know to be a fact. Although the presuppositionalist is gung-ho to take this into great lengths in terms of applicability. They could argue that the atheist, merely just by not being a believer, is ipso facto committing a form of idolatry, which I don't think is the case. Furthermore, God gave them over to degrading passions as well, as the verse continues to read. And if that's the case, if people are committing homosexual acts because of this, now I have to question, do all non-believers also commit homosexual acts as well? I find that hard to believe unless they're suppressing their truth about whether their genitalia have been secretly for quite some time. I don't think this applies. Rather, I think the better thing is to merely conclude that this is in mention of people in the beginning of creation, not necessarily everyone subsequently. And this would make sense. I mean, you had people like Cain, Abel, Adam, Eve, early people in what the Bible will chronicle as early humanity interacting with God. So, of course, mankind drifts off into idolatry, and of course God doesn't appear later until Abraham. Now, what one wants to make of the early stuff is interesting in its own right. I would recommend The Four Views of Adam in Genesis, which is an interesting book you could purchase at Amazon. I'm reading it through, and so far, I'm not hating it. Now, but onto our main topic here. Another thing to also point out is that natural law and natural theology also posit the existence of God. For, remember, the verse says, "For his invisible attributes and eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through that which has been made, so that they are without excuse." End quote. So, here it's just saying that God can be seen through nature. And of course, Christians provide moral arguments, cosmological arguments, teleological arguments, and all sorts of arguments from nature. All of which are supposed to be the way one discusses things with the non-believer. By the way, this verse seems to be more apropos of classical apologetics, which I would classify myself as again. So if this is the case, then this verse really doesn't seem to support the presuppositional position so much as it supports my own. Now, if for the coup de grace, let's also throw in a reductio ad absurdum, if the presuppositionalist is adamant about their interpretation. This is my Mark 17, verse 1-2 defense, or approach. Actually, it's not a defense, it's an offense. I'm attacking their view. So, the structure of their argument follows like this. God decrees X. X is therefore true. Hence, X is unchallengeable. Even if you know it firsthand, even if you're cognitively aware that you do not believe in the existence of God, you're lying somehow. And the presuppositionalists could say, look, I could believe you or I could believe God. God has a better track record of this stuff. So, of course, that's where the presuppositionalist is going to go. Now, you could respond, and I've done this, and it's quite fun, with the following verse. "And Christ said, there will be those claiming that my apostle Paul says that all non-believers have an inherent knowledge of God's existence. Well, these people have no anus. They suppress this truth in their ungraciousness and unrighteousness, and even suppress the existence of the words I speak to you here and now, which will be written in God's eternal word." Now, suffice to say, we all know that Mark chapter 17, verses 1-2 don't exist. But the presuppositionalist does not. I should correct that. The presuppositionalist has no reason to believe this is not the case if they want to continue with their argument. Let us suppose for a second that the presuppositionalist denies the very existence of this verse. Well, they're begging the question, because according to that verse, they're not supposed to know about said verse. This is something that they're taking it on via your own word to them. Now, there are a couple of objections. They could say, you're a believer, you have to speak the truth about these things. And, of course, your answer is, how do you know I'm not speaking the truth about these things? You're not being facetious here. You're demonstrating a fact that even a non-believer could bring to them. The non-believer could just merely state the same thing. And, of course, their objection is, you're a non-believer, I don't even have to believe you. Your response is, exactly. So I'm just suppressing the truth and being inconsistent, as you say. That does not mean I'm not right about God claiming you lack an anus. Which is true. They're not wrong. Unless you want to commit a genetic fallacy, which means you're just disregarding something because of the source. Now, if this is the case, if they could bring you to global skepticism, is this really a good argument to go down the path on? I should think not. So, with that in mind, I'll direct you guys to the blog post. I already have. And I'll end the video here, at least with regards to this topic. Now, I'd like to end by thanking everyone for still staying subscribed to this channel, for understanding what's changed, and I'd also like to give an apology to a couple of people. One such person is Alex Botten. I was kind of a dicty, and I apologize. Now, this doesn't mean I don't think I was wronged in some sense. I just don't think I should force an apology out of you. You could apologize if you want, if you feel you've done anything wrong. If not, then I trust your judgment, and I'm just going to give my own apology. And I'd like to apologize to Andy Wells, whose mom I've horribly insulted by insinuating I have slept with her. Such was not the case, and it was an immature your mama joke. And I apologize, sir. And that's about the only two people I think I deserve to apologize to. So with that, I end the video. Thanks for having me back, and I hope you appreciated the content.